Welcome, tennis fans, to the 19th episode of Tennis Traverse, Exploring the Game, the podcast that delves into the heart of the tennis world. I'm your host, IBJ, and in today's episode, I will be talking about the Brisbane International, predicting its winners, and how far Nadal and Osaka is going to go in this tournament. And before I start and do all of my plugins, I just want to say Happy New Year. This episode will be released on January 1st, and finally we have some tennis action going on. There's so much anticipation surrounding this tournament just because of how a lot of big names are coming back, and this is basically the first kind of tournament to prepare for this upcoming season, and I'm so excited to see what this upcoming season will bring us. So before we begin, please follow all of my social medias, that is Instagram and Twitter, using @TennisTraverse, that is @TennisTraverse. If you're listening on YouTube, comment, like, and subscribe. And if you're listening on other streaming platforms, please rate my show. And let's get right into today's episode. Okay, so I kind of want to just talk about what the Brisbane International tournament is. So basically, it is a tournament that players attend to prepare themselves for the Australian Open, which is one of the major tournaments in the whole year. So for WTA, the tournament is worth 500 points, and for ATP, the tournament is worth 250 points. And I'll leave the link to the tournament website if you guys want to go check it out. There's scores on there and just different draws you guys can analyze, so I'll leave the link down below. Okay, so the top 3 seeds for the men's side is going to be Holger Rune, Grigor Dimitrov, and Ben Shelton. So as you can see, players such as Novak Djokovic or Carlos Alcaraz isn't competing in this tournament because there's another tournament that's going on. I feel like it's worth mentioning. It's called the United Cup, and this is basically sort of it's kind of like how countries compete against each other. It's not individual. It's like they're representing their countries. So players such as Novak Djokovic, Casper Ruud, they're all competing in that tournament, and that tournament is in Perth. But for this episode, I'll just talk about Brisbane International. So just keep that in mind because a lot of players might not compete in this tournament because they're competing in the other tournament. Okay, the top 3 seeds for WTA is Serena Sabalenka, Elena Rybakina, and Jelena Ostapenko. So this tournament will be Brisbane International will be starting on December 31st, which is when I'm recording this episode, and it will go up to January 7th. And Australian Open starts on January 14th. So we have a week gap between those two for the players to sort of prepare themselves for the biggest tournament, one of the biggest tournament of the year, and the first big tournament of the year. So, they can try to calm their nerves down and just try to enjoy themselves. Okay, so I feel like now we can talk about predicting the Brisbane International winners, and I'll start with the men's side first. So I said that Holger Rune should be able to reach the quarterfinals, where he will be most likely to face the 5th seed, which is Sebastian Korda. However, I feel like Holger will be able to defeat Sebastian Korda because last year Korda didn't have a great form at Australia. So I feel like if Korda maintains his form from last year, Holger will have no problem beating him. And Holger had kind of a good ending to his year. However, I feel like in the semifinals, Ben Shelton will win the semifinal. So it's going to be Ben Shelton versus Holger Rune. And this is just a really high anticipated matchup in my opinion. And I feel like Ben Shelton's gonna win just because he's more powerful, if that makes any sense. I'm not saying that if you're not powerful you will lose, but I'm just saying I feel like because it's the start of the season, obviously every player is well rested for the most part, and with Ben Shelton's serve, and I feel like the crowd loves him more than Holger, so I feel like Ben Shelton's gonna win the semifinal. So this is the top half. And then on the bottom half, I have Grigor beating Rafa in the semifinals. And I'll explain this later on. I'll talk about Rafa more specifically later on. But after that, I feel like the final between Grigor and Ben Shelton, I feel like Ben Shelton's gonna win because, as I said before, Ben Shelton's obviously younger and Grigor's, sorry, but he's kind of old now. So I feel like Ben Shelton will have a better chance. And it's quite hot in Brisbane, so I feel like that could be an advantage for Grigor just because Dimitrov is, well, more experienced, so he knows his body better and he knows how to deal with himself and how he can manage his shots when it's really really hot. And compared to Ben Shelton, he may not. Like Ben Shelton, because obviously he's young, he's not played in Australia for that like that many times. So I feel like Grigor just have a better chance in that aspect. Like he knows his body better and he can adjust to the really humid and hot weather. Yet, however, I still feel like Ben Shelton has a slight edge just because he's. Sorry if I say this again, but I feel like he's just more powerful. And he's just, I don't know. He's just. I just think he'll win because the crowd loves him. Obviously, the crowd also loves Grigor Dimitrov. However, I feel like I'm rooting for Grigor to win just because he had such an amazing year last year, especially during Paris Masters, where he lost against Novak. But as I said this like countless times, Novak is Novak. So you can't really blame him for losing. And Grigor played amazingly, so I think I'm rooting for Grigor since this it's like a countdown to his last match. But Ben Shelton is just the start, so I'm rooting for Grigor, but I think Ben Shelton will win. Okay, now we'll talk about Rafa. Actually, before we talk about Rafa, let's talk about some interesting round one matchups, and it will kind of like lead my conversation into Rafa. But the first interesting matchup will be like it's round one matchups because the tournament hasn't officially begun yet. So the first matchup is Grigor and Andy, Grigor Dimitrov versus Andy Murray. So this is a really really interesting matchup. It's really funny because I feel like Andy always delivers during Australia swing. So like he always plays really interesting and entertaining matches. For example, last year during Australian Open, he played I'm pretty sure it's like a 5 hour long match against Kokonakis. I think I talked about this in my podcast before, but it was just super long and there were some amazing rallies in there. And yeah, so I feel like Andy Murray versus Grigor Dimitrov is going to be a great match because both players won't give up easily. They will fight and run to every single ball. So there should be a lot of rallies between these two, and it's just going to be really entertaining because they can both run really fast. So yeah. And then the other matchup is Rafa Nadal versus Dominic Thiem. And I think this is going to be an amazing matchup, and it's kind of symbolistic because obviously a lot of people were saying how Dominic Thiem is going to be kind of the one that's going to represent Rafa once Rafa retires, and now they both are experiencing severe injuries. With Rafa is with his hip, and then Dominic Thiem it's with his wrist. And Dominic Thiem just hasn't been delivering for the past few years. Obviously, with his injuries, it's really hard to perform as well as he did before. However, I feel like this is, as I said before, a really symbolistic matchup just because of how similar these players are how they're like really good on clay and not so good compared to the other courts, if that makes any sense. But they played 15 matches in total, and Rafa has a slight edge to its head-to-head, which is 9-6. However, I do want to mention that they played twice on hard courts, and it is split, which means Rafa won one and Dominic Thiem won one, so it's split. And this match will be deciding who has a slight edge between the head-to-head, so it's like a decider to see who, obviously, as I said before, like will gain a 2-1 lead if they win. And my prediction is I think Nadal's gonna win in two because obviously there has been a lot of talks surrounding Rafa just because he's part of the Great Three and he's such an incredible player, arguably one of the best player of all time. And he practiced with Andy Murray and Holger Rune, and he also said that I'm happy to be back on the tour and happy to be here in Brisbane after a few years. So obviously he's really in a really good mindset, and he also impressed Holger and Andy, who told the press that they think Rafa is doing really well. He's moving his feet. He's playing in a really top condition. So I think Rafa's gonna beat Dominic Thiem in two. And then the next matchup will be beating Karatsev, who was seeded number 8. I still feel like Rafa just has that slight edge. One of it, I think part of it is because of his mentality when playing tennis, and I don't think the stress or like the anticipation will catch up to him just because he's so experienced. And this might be slightly different with Naomi Osaka, which I will talk about later, but I just think Rafa has a slight edge. So I predicted that the semifinals will be Rafa versus Grigor, and I think this will just be an amazing matchup because both players, they have some incredible history together. They're both experienced players on tour. They've attended multiple ATP finals together, and I just think that will be an amazing matchup for Rafa's first return. And yeah, I'm just really excited to see what's gonna happen with him, and I have high hopes. Okay, so let's move on to the women's side now. So I kind of let's just start off with predictions as well. So I predicted the semifinal matchups to be for the top half to be Sablenka and Azarenka. And this obviously is an interesting matchup, but I feel like Sablenka's gonna win, obviously, just because of how consistent she is, especially in the first swing, like in the first few months of the tennis season. And I kind of wrote out the bracket to the semifinals we're predicting. So Sablenka's round, like she has a bye in round one, and then her round two opponent she's gonna beat, and then she has I feel like an interesting matchup in round three, no matter who she plays against, because if Daniel Collins wins or Julian wins, it's gonna be a really interesting matchup because Julian did really well last year in Australian Open, and Daniel Collins, obviously, she's been in the Australian Open final, and she literally just never gives up. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. So I feel like Sablenka has a slight edge between those two. And then I'm just going to say that the semifinal, just go back to where I was. I feel like it's going to be Sablenka and Victoria Azarenka, and Sablenka's going to win. And then I'll talk about Naomi later, obviously, but then let's just move on to the bottom half. So for my bottom half, I said that the semifinal matchup will be between Mira Andreeva and Elena Rybakina. I do want to point out that I think Mira Andreeva is such an incredible player. She's literally a day younger than me. That's crazy. And she's playing against players I look up to, and I also look up to her now because she potentially has a chance to play against Naomi Osaka, which is basically my idol. And I feel like that's just super meaningful because I just feel like our generation is now catching up, and I can see some of like my generation's players playing against the top names. And I said the semifinal will be Mira and Elena Rybakina. However, I feel like Elena's gonna come out on top, and the winner basically will be between Sablenka and Elena. And I said Sablenka just because obviously she won Australian Open last year, and I get how it's not the same tournament, but because she literally won like the biggest tournament in Australia, every fan will be cheering for her even if it's not the same tournament. So I think that's slightly on her side. And also just because Sablenka always has a great start to her year, and yeah, so I think Sablenka's gonna win the whole tournament. But now let's just talk about some players we should pay attention to in some round one matchups. So I said Caroline Dolehide, Sophia Kenin, and Mira Andreeva are the three players you guys should pay attention to. So Caroline Dolehide, obviously, she did really well last year. I believe it was during Guadalajara. She did really well. And then Sophia Kenin, she won Australian Open in 2020. It's been a long time, and she obviously suffered from a lot of injuries, and we haven't heard from her for a long time. But I feel like a lot of injured players are coming back stronger this year, so I'm looking forward to see her play. And for her round one match, I believe she's playing. Wait, let me see. Sophia Kenin. Okay, she has a bye in round one, and then she's either gonna play against Trevisan or Rodionova, who has a wild card because she's from Australia. But I think Trevisan's gonna win, so Sophia Kenin and Trevisan is going to be an interesting matchup. And if Sophia Kina wins that, she's going to play hopefully against Mira and Druba, which will also be a interesting matchup. Okay, I'm getting way too ahead of myself, but I just want to say that there's a lot of interesting players you guys should pay attention to on a women's side, just because the women's side, the tournament is a 500-point tournament, so obviously there's more players competing in that instead of the United Cup. Okay, so round one matchups, I can only, like, when I'm looking at the bracket, I can only think of one, but I think that's fine. So it is Peyton Stearns and Camila Georgie. So I think this is, like, one of the best matchups because obviously Peyton Stearns had such an amazing end of the year. She made it to the semifinals of the US Open. And Camila is obviously, she's sort of like a stable player on top. Like, she's obviously not really amazing. She's not in the top 5 or the top 10, but she's like consistently around like the 20s or the 10s, which is not that bad. So, not sorry, it's not bad. It's like amazing. So, I feel like it's gonna be an interesting matchup between those two. So, I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, now let's talk about Osaka. Osaka, my favorite. So, she's finally playing again. I'm so happy. So she took a break because of her mental issues and her pregnancy, and she gave birth, which I'm super happy for her. And her last tennis match was in September of 2022, I believe, where she like retired in Tokyo, if I'm not mistaken, but she hasn't played in a long time. And I'm super happy to see her back on court again. I'm recording this on a Sunday, right? And then she's playing at 8 p.m. today. So hopefully by the time my episode comes out, well, obviously you guys will know who wins, but please, I hope Naomi wins. Okay, so now let's just talk about who she's playing against in round one. So she's playing against, um, sorry if I butcher her name, Tamara Korbach, and she's from Germany. She's ranked 87 in the world, which is not horrible. However, I feel like Naomi just through her pregnancy and her time away from tennis, as she said herself, she's learning more about herself and how she loves tennis. So she's coming back obviously with a better mindset. So I feel like she will win this match easily. However, realistically speaking, I feel like her toughest competition will be her next round opponent, which is Pliskova. So she played against Pliskova in Brisbane, I believe it was 3 years ago or 4 years ago. It's a long time, but I think it was 4 years ago. I don't know if I'm mistaken, but she played against Pliskova and then she lost in Brisbane. I believe it was the semifinals. However, I feel like she played really good. So this is going to be an interesting matchup. It's kind of like a rematch because they played obviously a long time ago and now both players have sort of fallen from where they were before. Naomi with her mental health issues and her pregnancy, and like they kind of just hasn't been as like top tier as they were before. Not saying that they're like competitiveness decreased, but I'm just saying how they've just been less heard about the tennis world because of obviously their respective just like problems surrounding themselves, such as injuries and mental health issues. Sorry, I've been rambling, but I just feel like it's kind of a rematch, and to be honest, I don't think Naomi Osaka will win just because Pliskova, obviously, she's been consistently playing on the tour, whereas Naomi hasn't played in over a year. So I think Pliskova will win. But if Naomi shocks all of us and beat Pliskova, she's gonna breeze through. However, I feel like one of her tough matchups. Wait, let me see. One of her tough matchups will be against Azarenka, who she played against in 2021, I'm pretty sure, in the US Open final. And she obviously lost round one by the score of 1-6. However, she managed to come back and win the whole thing. And she still maintains a 4 out of 4 finals record at Grand Slams, which is super impressive. And this is like sort of a rematch like the one with Pliskova as well, but both of these two are really meaningful rematches, and I'm just really happy to see sort of how both players are coming back. And to be honest, I'm just really looking forward to this season because a lot of incredible players are coming back, notably in this tournament, Rafa Nadal and Naomi Osaka. And I just haven't been watching tennis for like a month, and finally we're kind of getting back to tennis. And I do want to give a fan shout out. Someone left a comment on my Spotify on my Naomi Osaka episode, and they were talking about how they really enjoyed me talking about Naomi Osaka and how they love Naomi Osaka as well. And they're really happy that I got her autograph. I just want to say thank you so much for y'all's support. It really means so much to me. I'm literally 16 and I'm starting this podcast just to talk about how much I love tennis. And I'm just so grateful that you guys want to support my episode, my podcast, just everything in general. Thank you so, so much. And I guess that wraps up today's episode. So please follow all of my social medias. I'm not active on those. I just post like a post once my episode comes out. But because I'm really busy with schoolwork and stuff, I'll try to make more posts and interact with y'all more. But please follow my social medias, Instagram and Twitter, using at Tennis Traverse. That is at Tennis Traverse. If you're listening on YouTube, comment, like, and subscribe. If you're listening on other streaming platforms, please rate my show. And I will leave a link to all of my social medias, including a link tree in the description in the podcast. Sorry, I can't talk. In the episode description down below. And I guess the next episode we'll talk about what's like who won the Brisbane International or predict the finals. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye.